In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Marxist social construction, more specifically about this dialectic of the superstructure and the base as it pertains to a Marxian understanding of socioeconomics and history. So, the superstructure is usually the realm of education, family, religion, politics, and mass media. If you think of the matrix, right, that is created as above, so below, this upper level here is society. This lower level here is the realm of socialized beings, people who live within a society. And so what happens is all people have these quaternity of these socio-historic forces that are imposed upon us as human beings. We have a cultural force, historical, social, and spiritual force. And then the base ultimately is the relation of production, the means of production. This is usually the realm of necessity for people. What I've always said is we got to look at how consciousness, if we think about it from a consciousness perspective, we think about consciousness is the capacity to navigate through this sort of dialectic of the superstructure that is imposed upon us. That consciousness is creating a coherent and cohesive narrative identity within the circuitous nature of the cosmos cycle and the perennial unfolding of reality as a socio-historic process. The quaternity of these socio-historic processes that are imposed upon us as human beings, and then a myriad of these social constructs that then an individual then uses to name their lived world within the base. The main way that people begin to identify themselves is in the realm of class, right? So class is ultimately codified through things like race. And when we think about the pentad of Marxist ecology, the division of labor usually has to do with sex and gender. Let's break these down. Let's break this quaternity of these social constructs down, okay? So when we think about class, as it pertains to the Black experience, we understand that there is a class of Black people who exist in the realm of material security. We'll call them Black excellence. This is the raposphere, the athletosphere, the streamosphere, the entertainment sphere, and so on and so forth. And then beneath them, beneath their prosperity, is working class families. Okay? The class of people who touch earth. When we think about race, race also has a dialectical component as well, because when we think about Blackness, especially as it pertains to hip hop, for example, that there are ultimately Black people who don't grow up in the realm of hip hop, right? So, Black people who grew up in the suburbs, Black people who grew up like a Little Bill or had the archetype of Penny Proud, will just say that they grew up bohemian. So as you begin to see that Blackness has this as above, so below characteristic when we think about class, and it has this as within, so without characteristic when we think about race. When we think about sex, sex is maleness and femaleness, right? So for me, I see myself again, handsome. So I'm a male. And then when we move to gender, gender is masculine and feminine, right? The interplay of these two gendered components. So as a gender identity, being androgynous is an interplay of both masculine and feminine components. So being Hansel and Gretel a la vez. So I see myself as an androgynous male. So when you begin to think about how these sort of aspects of class, because these are all reflections of class, that then to be a working class black man who happens to be bohemian and an androgynous male, what then do you call this point? Right? If this is the centeredness of being, if this point here, this the centeredness of the self, what then do you call this point? You then have the capacity to then name the animals, right? So I would say that this lived experience for me is understood to be mukimne. That is what it's like to be a black, gender nuanced person beneath the prosperity of the rappers and the athletes. When we also think about women as a class, as second class citizens, this is why they are relegated to second class citizens, because of their sex, their femaleness, and their femininity. So women are always existing down here in the realm of necessity because of that. But what we know to be true from the perspective of the pentat of Marxist ecology is that the universal subject is the ecological being. This sort of understanding leads into and is inspired by Antonio Gramsci's concepts of cultural hegemony. And it critiques how certain groups, right, they seek to dominate cultural narratives while marginalizing others. And this is also why, from Marxist perspective, women, the historical position of women in society is what moves society forward. So when we begin to look at how the concubinization of women that's ultimately happening within society, how women's bodies are being commodified, it's ultimately because they exist here in the base. They exist in the realm of necessity. And as we know to be true about the archetype of Hagar, women need a place to be. And it is ultimately men that will consume their affluentia and leave them relegated to live a life beneath them that way. So, women are an integral part of creating a more sustainable society for us to live in. That the liberation of women as a class of people ultimately is culminated when we begin to realize that the universal subject is the ecological being. And that is what the story of Hagar ultimately reveals to us.